Switch that to HDMI. Content and live. Okay, I think I got it here. Now, why isn't anything appearing on the screen? Okay, perfect. All right. Woo. Oops. Okay. All right. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Okay. So, hopefully we're all doing all right today. It's, our last class before reading week of this class. So let us jump in. So we got a couple of slides left to discuss socialization, and then we are going to move. Just trying to lower the volume a little here, and then we're going to move to deviance and crime, which is our next unit. Okay, I don't remember what that referred to. Who's my favorite Kardashian? I don't have one. They're all terrible. Okay, so I'm going to go back just a little bit here to Thomas' theorem and self-fulfilling prophecy. Okay, I'm going to give you some examples. So, something like the Thomas theorem, right? Basically, something we define as real or a belief becomes real in its consequences. All right, so here. An example, you tell a kid that there's monsters under the bed, right? Okay, or in the case of, me, let's use me as an example. When when I was really little, my parents would take us camping. And for whatever reason, they were terrified that I was gonna wander out of the trailer in the middle of the night, and they were, and that I was gonna wander off and get eaten by a bear or something. So they told me that there were witches in the forest, right? There were witches in the forest. Now, because I was a child and stupid, I believed that there were witches in the forest. And, I was afraid to go in it. And I am still kind of afraid to go in the forest. I do not like the forest. So that is an example of the Thomas theorem, right? So they told me something, so I defined as real that there were witches in the forest, and I was scared of witches because witches are bad, and therefore I manifested as a real fear, right? Something that was based on just a belief, right? So that is the Thomas theorem. Something that we think is true becomes real in its consequence. You can also think of, if there is, for example, let's say a student at a school that is a little bit differently oriented, right, in terms of their abilities. Maybe they like, let's say that they like something very physical rather than maybe math or something more theoretical, right? So let's say they like shop more than they like, let's say, math. So what can happen there is that because maybe you treat that person as, someone who can't learn math, right? They're not good at math, but they are good at shop. So you put them into a track where they take shop and they do physical things, into some kind of more physical kind of education, something that's more, I guess, applied than maybe theoretical, and they end up in, going into the trades because they've been told, hey, you're really good at working with your hands, so you should probably become like a plumber or a carpenter, right? That one's not insidious, right? It's not bad to put people into the trades, but maybe, if that person had, really been tutored in math, been helped by teachers, rather than said, oh, this is just one of those kids that's really good at shop, and therefore they're going to be in the trades, maybe they would have done something different, right? So that's the Thomas theorem. Okay. The self-fulfilling prophecy is more like your expectation brings about what it predicts, right? So, let's say, okay, so hopefully you understand the Thomas theorem. I don't know if that helped at all. Okay, no indication. Self-fulfilling prophecy is more like, okay, your belief in something brings about something. So let's say for whatever reason, right, it's coming up to Valentine's Day and you realize that your romantic partner is sort of being sneaky, right, not giving you any details, and you think that that person is, maybe you've been cheated on before, you think they're cheating on you, right? And so you basically look for all of the signs that they're cheating on you, right? They're keeping secrets, they're not telling you something, right? They're being secretive. And so you are like, oh, this relationship is over, and you break up with them. Now, maybe they were actually just planning a really beautiful Valentine's Day surprise for you or something like that. But your expectation that a certain set of behaviors meant cheating, and that the relationship was then over, brought about that result, right? Or maybe because you start to, treat them badly, you're like suspecting that they're being unfaithful. Maybe it pushes them into the arms of another person and they actually do cheat on you, right? So, I don't want to blame the victim though. I'm just using it as an example. The cheating is always the cheater's fault. Okay, I don't know if that helped. Hopefully it did. Okay. Let's fast forward back to our last couple of slides here. In socialization, before we move on to deviance and crime. Okay, so we left off talking about re-socialization, right? And this is when you end up in a situation where some kind of powerful socializing agent deliberately causes a rapid change in your roles, values, self-conception, sometimes against your will, though not always. Okay, I gave you two examples last time of prison, cults, and I thought of another one, gangs, right? So often, these are places, right, that have very different values, and where someone, very powerful, in this case, the COs, or even like if you want to go, a little bit higher, the state, because the state is putting you in prison, a cult, right, the religious leader, and gangs, gang leaders. Basically, you're brought into these kind of spaces, and you're forced to readjust your expectations, norms, and values to conform to that group very quickly, right? So, and it can change, all sorts of things, your roles, your values, even your self-conception, right? And gangs are really good at doing this. One of the things that is frequently true of gangs, right, is that part of the initiation ritual of a gang is to get you to commit a crime. And why is that important? Well, it immediately sort of changes your values, right? Because suddenly you start committing crimes, so things that you thought were maybe right and wrong before, or that you've been taught were right and wrong, now that gets inverted, right? The group actually values the crime. So it's a form of re-socialization, right? They're changing your norms and values really, really substantially in a short period of time. Okay. So, a big part of a lot of socialization, especially into particular groups, is what's called an initiation rite. So, initiation rites, there's all sorts of them, but often when you enter a new group, right, particularly a very structured one, you end up going through an initiation rite of some kind. And it's meant, right, so let me highlight this, to mark your transition from one group to another and ensure your loyalty to the new group, right? So the point of, say, if you're entering a gang, the initiation ritual is to separate you from society, right? You belong to the gang now, right? You've now separated from the rest of society, and by committing that crime, right, you've signaled that you are part of the gang now. and you belong to them. Now, often, because, in a lot of cases, it is supposed to be a violent crime, it's also something they can hold against you to keep you in, right? So it signals your loyalty, like you've committed a crime for them, and it helps to ensure your loyalty because they can always use it against you. Okay, gang initiations are one kind, but a very classical description of initiation rituals, if you go back into early Christian history, so we're talking here, somewhere between 100 and let's say about 400 AD or CE, whichever notation you prefer. So baptism, right? Baptism is the rite that people undergo usually when they're converting to Christianity. And in this period, right, you had large numbers of people converting to Christianity from paganism. And they had a very particular way of doing it. Now, this ends up changing later, when they start baptizing babies, it becomes a different kind of ritual, though the elements are still there. Like if you go to a Catholic church and you see a baby being baptized, a lot of the elements are still there. They were just much starker in kind of the ancient world. So you had a ritual rejection, right? And because you were in a society that was, pagan and worshipped like the Greek and Roman gods and other gods, you would reject those gods by spitting west, right? So wherever west was, you would spit west as a way of renouncing the gods of the west, right? Because, Jerusalem was in the east, and you'd be acknowledging the God of Jerusalem. Okay. And then you would undergo a ritual death. So, right, this image here, this is what's called a baptistry, right? So it's a big tank, essentially. And this person is being baptized. Now, the way that they did it in the early church was they would do, basically, they would submerge the person entirely underwater, right? And this is supposed to be death, right? It's a ritual representation of drowning. Erase my. So you would be dying, by being submerged, right? You were drowning, you were dying to your old life as a not Christian. And then you come out of the water, right? You're lifted out of the water by the person baptizing you, right? And it's kind of like being reborn, right? Because I guess you come out wet and sticky from your mother, so you come out wet from, the baptistry, and it's kind of like being reborn. Oh, the other thing I should mention in the ritual rejection that I forgot, you would strip naked, right? So you would strip completely naked, get into the baptistry, and you would be plunged underwater, and then you would come out and you would be given new clothes, right? You would be given, and usually it was white. So whatever clothes you had going in, you strip naked, you take that off, and you come out and they give you new, you drown to your old life, you die to it. You're brought out of the waters into a new life, and you're kind of ritually reborn. Now, not every single initiation rite has all three steps, right? But a lot, and they're not always as kind of symbolically clear as kind of early Christian baptism. And even if you look at baptism for babies in the Catholic Church today, or where some evangelicals still do the full immersion, right? It's not as symbolically rich as it was in the past, right? Usually now nobody strips naked to be baptized, as far as I know. If there is that happening, it's probably in some weird sex cult, of which there are many, strangely enough. For some reason, cults and cult leaders really like, especially recently, in the last 10 years, it's like one of the initiation rituals is female members have to have sex with the cult leader. There was one in Vancouver where it was in an Egyptian sarcophagus. It was weird, but that's neither here nor there. So, I think someone just had some fetishes and made himself a cult. Okay. So that's initiation rituals. I'm going to go back and see if there are any questions. Nothing. No one wants to know about anything. Okay, perfect. So total institutions, right? Total institutions, and here you frequently get resocialization in total institutions because they are total, right? Okay, they are settings, right, in which people are isolated from the larger society and under the strict control and constant supervision of staff, right? So again, prisons and cults are frequent ones for total institutions. Okay, so yeah, if you're put into prison, right, you get cut off from the larger society, right, the society that you were in, put under the supervision of specialized staff, correctional officers, and psychologists and other prison staff, right? And your life is very much controlled. Like, they control when you exercise, they control when you watch television, they control pretty much everything about your life. And there's been effort, experiments over time to try and recreate this in artificial environments to try and figure out, what this does to people. One of the very famous ones historically was what was called the Stanford Prison Experiment, which has a lot of problems with it, and it's been proven in the interim to actually have been a hoax. But the idea was, take a bunch of Stanford undergrads, assign them randomly either to be guards or prisoners, and observe the social dynamics that occur when you tell them, you have to stay in this simulated prison environment for X amount of hours, right? And famously, the result was that the guards quickly got very abusive and started to, over control the people who were set as prisoners. Now, in the intervening years, one of the things that's come out is the person running the experiment told the people who were being assigned as guards how he wanted them to act. So it wasn't a true experiment, but that's, it's still used as an example of what can happen in isolated environments, right? And prisons, if you've, God forbid, never go to prison. They're terrible places. Unless you're visiting someone who's in prison, in which case I'm sad that you know someone in prison, but that's okay. But they're really bad places. But they are very much locked down, and people lose a lot of their sense of who they are in these places. And, because I work kind of on the edges of this big project and studying people who've been incarcerated, one of the things that's become really clear, and we've known this for a while actually, is a lot of people, when they get out, especially if they've been in for a long time, they no longer know how they're supposed to behave outside, right? A lot of them will actually try to get rearrested because they understand the social norms in the total institution, but because they've been cut off for maybe years from kind of society, they don't know how to function in society. They only know how to function in the prison. And they have to kind of relearn, coming out of a total institution, how to be in society. Okay. So, okay, that's one category. Let's move to this other one. I'm going to change pen colors just so you know this is a separate topic, not connected to total institutions. All right. Anticipatory socialization is another kind of socialization that can happen, right? So, what do we have in anticipatory socialization? Okay, this is where people, knowing that a change is coming, will start to adopt whatever behaviors and roles they think they're going to need in that role, right? So this is like, if you want to put this in a catchy phrase, or I don't know how catchy it is actually, but a kind of, let's say an aphorism, people will say, don't dress for the job you have, dress for the job you want. Which leads me to the question of what job a lot of professors want. That's okay. I just remember I was teaching not here, but at a different undergraduate or university in Edmonton, and I remember walking through the halls and seeing professors like in tracksuits, and I was like, are you the gym teacher here? I don't understand, but it's kind of interesting. Okay, so you anticipate what the roles might be. Like, I don't know, if you want to be a professional, okay, so here, I'll tell you this. In law school, right? So I have a bunch of our former grad students in sociology and crim that have now moved into law school, right? Really bright, really wonderful people. And one of the things that law school encourages them to do while they're going to law school is to wear, business attire. Business attire all the time. So we still let them use our criminology center as their kind of home base because we're, they were our students for 3-4 years and we like them. And they all have suits hanging in their stalls, right? Why? Because the Faculty of Law is like, anticipate what it's going to be like to be a professional. Start embodying professionalism as your ethos, right? So come to class wearing a shirt and a suit and tie, right? Or for the women, right, like women's business apparel. They're putting them through a process of anticipatory socialization. What is it going to be like to dress that way, to take on that role of legal professional, even though they're not that thing yet? Okay, I have two more points. Even in adulthood, right, and I've said this, socialization happens from birth to death. Even in adulthood, the self is always flexible. People generally can change. People don't always change, but they can. It is possible. And people go through a lot of changes in life. When you become a parent, when you get your first real job, when you become a parent, when your children get older, when you become a grandparent, right? You're constantly changing yourself and your self-concept to kind of meet those new challenges and those new things in the environment. Okay. And a couple of things, right? All right. Things that are contributing to the flexible self today: globalization, right? So we have more cultural forms that we can draw from, and the growing ability to fashion new bodies from old. Increasingly, we have the ability to change our bodies physically, and think of anyone who gets plastic surgery is kind of doing this, right? If you get I see all the women on Instagram that people make fun of with the big puffy lips, right? This is kind of it, right? They've been socialized into thinking that's beauty, and so they're fashioning their bodies using technology doing that. Okay, last kind of point. I think this is my last point. Yes. Okay. So last point in socialization, the internet. We're still kind of discovering ways that the internet makes it possible to play with the self, right? And digital technologies allow all sorts of identity games. Social media and especially video games allow people to kind of play with identity. This has been clear for a long time, especially around things like gender, things like, I don't think it's still a thing, but it used to be called Second Life, which was sort of like a SimCity life simulator where you could have an avatar and live in real world scenarios online, or even games, role-playing games where you could be male or female or an elf or an orc or whatever and kind of take on different experiences. It helps us to kind of, experiment with identity, right? You can be who you want to be or explore different aspects of your personality through digital technologies. Okay. I'm going to switch over to deviance and crime. Give me half a second here. I just have to find the right slideshow, unless you want to talk about the Da Vinci Code, which I'm talking about in a different class. Okay. Ta-da. There we go. Just make sure the live stream is still working. It looks good. Okay, perfect. All right, so I look at this and I wonder why did I choose this particular graphic for deviance and crime? I don't know. Okay, we're going to switch to talking about deviance and crime. And this serves as kind of a brief introduction. The department has, 2 different courses on this, so this is going to be very brief. So if you want to talk deviance in more detail in subsequent semesters, SOS 224 is deviance, sociology of deviance, and SOS 225, bless you, is criminology, intro to criminology. So, if you're interested, in deviance and crime, and I know lots of people come into sociology and wind up in these courses as well, they are both available. Bless you. Okay. All right. So I think this is the same code as last time. I think I've learned how to use continuous codes in Slido. I'm learning as we go along. Okay. So what is our definition of deviance and crime, right? So we talked, bless you. It's that season, everyone's getting sick, right? Okay. Norms, right? We talked about norms, right? And we talked about our different levels of norms, our folkways, our mores, our taboos, and laws, right? So norms vary widely, and deviance is relative, right? So what is deviant? What is deviance? So it's basically any action that deviates from the norms, right? That goes against a social norm of some kind. And of course, right, because we have our 4 levels of norms, right? We have our folkways. We have our mores. We have our taboos. And we have our laws. There are different kinds of levels of deviance, right? Deviating from a folkway is not particularly serious, whereas deviating from a taboo is going to get you in big trouble, right? So, all of these things are relative, right? There is no absolute, thing where you can say sociologically that one particular kind of action is definitively deviant in all cases, right? And something that's considered deviant at one time in history or in one place might not be deviant in another, right? So if we think of something like premarital sex, right? If you went back to the 1950s, premarital sex would be considered deviant. It went against the norms of the time, and pretty strong ones, right? You'd be in the realm of mores, right? Having premarital sex would have been seen as immoral. Today, premarital sex is considered widely normal, right? It's not considered something that would, if you're engaged in it, would cause pretty much anyone, except maybe your grandma, to really have any concerns about it. So these things change over time, and they can change relatively rapidly. Okay, and yeah, what some people consider normal, others might consider deviant, and vice versa. So there is a fair bit of variance when we talk about deviance. And no act is deviant in and of itself. It's only deviant in its social context, right? So, and I don't know if this is good news or bad news, but everyone is deviant in some way, right? From a sociological perspective, everybody is deviant in some way, right? So when I am driving along with my children and I get cut off in traffic, and I swear at the person in front of me, and I say bad things. My children tell me I'm not a very nice driver. I can drive very safely, but I yell at people, and this is a form of deviance, right? Road rage is a form of deviance. I am deviant in some way. Okay? And if you dig deep enough, or probably not that deep, you're deviant in some way as well, right? There's something that you do that violates norms at either the level of folkways, mores, hopefully not too many taboo breakers, but maybe, who knows? You can marry your sister or brother, who cares, right? Who am I to judge? No, don't do that. Taboos or laws, right? So, yeah, deviance occurs when someone departs from a norm and evokes a negative reaction from others. Now, I think that second part is slightly optional as well, right? When you deviate from a norm, you are in some way deviant, whether you are observed or not. You are deviating, and if someone did see you, you would have been, you would have gotten a reaction from someone. Now again, this can be lots of things, right? If you say, I don't know, if you litter, right? So you go down the road and you pick up some food at the brand new Burger King that's over by the Tim Hortons. I don't know why you would. And I personally think that eating at Burger King should be considered deviant in and of itself because it's gross. But let's say you get food at the Burger King and you walk down the street, towards the university, and instead of putting your garbage in the, trash bins that are provided along the way, you just throw your wrapper on the ground, and I'm going to say it's a little old lady, I don't know why. So this is the scenario that comes into my head. And she's like, "You're going to pick that up, aren't you, dear?" Right? You have entered deviance, right? Why? Because you have done something. You have gone against the social norm of putting your garbage in the trash can, and a little old lady has reacted, right? Now that would be, a deviance from a folkway. Right? Not too serious. You got told off by some little old lady that was waiting for the bus. Her backstory is getting longer. By the time we get through the class, I'll have her whole life plotted. She was born in 1924 on a farm in rural Manitoba. No, okay. We're gonna plot her whole life out and how she got to telling you off about littering. It's an interesting story. Someone built a garbage dump on her house at one point, and she's never forgiven garbage since then. Okay, I'm kidding. Obviously, then you can deviate from more serious norms like mores, right? So let's say that you are cheating on a test. We'll say on a test. We could say romantic partner too, but let's not do that. You're cheating on a test, right? And you get caught. You get caught cheating, and you are given a grade of 0, and you are sent to the dean's office, and you are expelled from university, right? That deviance, you crossed a more. Okay, and then a taboo, right? Let's skip taboo for this one, and we'll go straight to law, right? A law, as we said before, is a norm that is stipulated and enforced by a government body. So, let's say, can we come up with an interesting scenario for a law, right? So a crime. You can commit a crime, right? And a crime is just a form of deviance that breaks a law. So you come to review your SOC 100 midterm, and you think that you should get an extra 3 grades on these multiple choice questions, and I refuse, so you murder me. Murder. I just took out a new life insurance policy, so I'm now officially worth more dead than alive. So there you go. So you murder me, right? And you get arrested for murder. You've broken a law, right? So you've committed a crime. My pen is not erasing. There we go. And you've broken a law, right? So all of these are forms of deviance at different levels. And they all basically start with violating some kind of social norm, and they're all going to evoke different levels of reaction, right? And all of these cases, you got a reaction. Here you got expelled, here you got told off, and here you got thrown in prison, which again, I don't recommend. Okay, so what's the difference kind of between some of these things? So people who are observed committing more serious acts of deviance, right? So here we would put ourselves at the level of mores, of taboos, and laws, which again, laws can cover taboos and laws can cover mores, are either punished formally or informally, right? So, I guess even if we talk about the level of folkway, let's put folkway back in here. Because folkway is almost always, you get an informal punishment, right? So that little old lady who told you off for littering at the bus stop, there's no formal process. She just is like, pick that up, dear, and hopefully you do it, because you should always obey the little old lady at the bus stop. Remember, She was born in rural Manitoba. No, I'm kidding. Okay, that's being silly. Her father's farm was destroyed when they built a garbage dump for the city of Winnipeg. And she's never forgiven the Manitoba government, which is why she lives in Alberta today. No, I don't know. Right, so that is a form of informal punishment, right? Informal punishment. Now, even at the level of, say, a more, you could get an informal punishment. Maybe because there's a lot of paperwork to fill out to get you expelled, right? Because you cheated on the test. Rather than, kicking you out, I just give you a grade of 0 and we have a stern conversation as like, if I ever catch you cheating again, I am actually going to get off my ass and fill out that really time-consuming paperwork and get you expelled, right? That's informal. Or let's talk about the other form of cheating, right? You cheat on your romantic partner and you get an informal punishment, right? You come back one day to your shared, this actually happened to a friend of mine. Not a great person, but so he had cheated on his girlfriend. They were living together. And he went off to work, and in the intervening 8 hours, she had 5 friends come over and empty the apartment completely, taking all of his stuff, including, for some reason, what he was most angry about, his Super Nintendo that he'd had since he was a kid. And of all the things, that he was upset about, he's like, she took my Super Nintendo. I'm like, yeah, she also took your car. I would be more upset about that one, but okay. Right, that would be a kind of informal punishment for cheating on her, right? She exacted a sort of revenge. She didn't have him arrested or anything. There's no formal process, right? So at the level of folkways and mores, we can get informal punishments. Once we get to typically, mores, taboos, and laws, a lot of the punishments are formal. Okay, now there actually could be theoretically informal punishments even for a taboo, right? Let's say that you violate some kind of deeply held social norm of your community, something that is really, central and core to the identity of this group. I'm trying to think of what it is, and I'm trying not to just use incest as my only example of a taboo. Well, I don't know, let's imagine that you're a part of a religious group that does not allow you to eat pork, right? And you eat pork or handle pork. Why? Because bacon is awesome. And you're shunned, right? Then you violated a taboo, right? It causes revulsion in your group. They're like, icky, pork, gross. They're wrong. They're so desperately wrong about pork. I don't know why, but it's just delicious, right? And they kick you out of the community, or they kick you out, right? Until you go through some kind of ritual purification. There's a lag on my pen all of a sudden. I'm sad. Okay, so you get kicked out of this particular community, right, until you either forever or until you undergo a ritual purification. Or maybe, right, you get married to an outsider in a very insular community and you are cast out forever, right? That would be an informal punishment, right? Because you probably didn't go through a social norm. It's just nobody in that community will talk to you or help you anymore. Okay, formal punishments are pretty obvious, right? If you cheat on your exam and I bother to, fill out the forms and get you expelled, I've gone through a formal process, right? Some kind of judicial or formal system, right? The dean's office goes through and you are formally punished. Or obviously, if you break a law, right, you end up getting arrested and sent through the legal system. So it's a very formal way of doing things. And you can think of if you cheat on your partner or your husband or wife or whatever, and then they institute a divorce proceeding, right? You're now in a system of kind of like formal punishment. Okay. Oh God. I forgot that I have the pyramid of hair-based crimes. Oh, delinquency is essentially like It's a term that's often just used to talk about deviance, a form of deviance in particular. Okay. All right. Okay, to show you, how forms of deviance change over time. This is an ad from March of 1885, right? So in the year of our Lord, 1885, Lloyd Manufacturing Company, in its great and infinite wisdom, was marketing and selling cocaine toothache drops for children, right? So your child had a toothache, give them a little bit of cocaine, right? And I love this part. Instantaneous cure, right? Like, strangely, you gave your child cocaine and they felt a lot better. I wonder what happened. Now, obviously, and again, because I don't want any of you to go to jail, I would recommend strongly against giving children cocaine in this day and age, because obviously what was perfectly fine, and you could put an ad in a newspaper in 1885, and you could sell cocaine for the price of 15 cents. There you go. Nice cheap cocaine back in 1885. The prices have gone up significantly, I understand. Probably due to it being illegal. Right, you could do that in 1885. It was very apparently normal, and you could put ads in the newspaper. Obviously, you cannot do that today for obvious reasons. Okay. Bless you, bless you. Okay. So, deviance and crime vary in 3 criteria. So, the severity of the social response, right? So, how serious are you getting told off by a little old lady, or are you being put in prison, right? Those are important questions. The perceived harmfulness, so both the actual harmfulness and how people think of it, and I'll show you my ridiculous pyramid of hair-based deviance on one of the next slides, and explain to you how even things that you might think are actually kind of dumb can be very serious acts of deviance in certain circumstances. And then the degree of public agreement. How serious does the public believe this to be? Okay, so we essentially have 4 levels of deviance that we can talk about given these 3 factors. So we can talk about, I'm going to go to green here, at the very base, right, the least serious kind of deviance is social diversion, right? So this is, again, probably at the level of folkway, violating very, very minor norms, things that are going to get you maybe kind of odd reactions, but you're probably not going to be treated too badly, right? And generally why? Okay, so the severity of the response is mild, right? And the evaluation of the social harm, it is seen as, whatever the deviance is, it's seen as relatively harmless. Okay, so the example here, because all of these examples have to do with hair. For consistency. Consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds, and apparently Little Minds wrote the textbook. Sorry, that's a John Adams quote. I don't know why I did that. Okay, so dyeing your hair purple or rainbow or bright red or something, right? Probably not as weird as the textbook authors think it is, but dyeing your hair a funky color, right, would be seen as kind of a little bit odd, right? And people might give you a sideways glance, right? If your hair is neon green, it might be like, oh, that's weird. Like, what a weird hair color, right? So you're definitely diverging, right? It's a social diverging from established norms, right? Where you usually go with your normal hair color, or in my case, just keep it a mystery and have no hair at all. Not by choice, by the way, sadly. So, mild, right? What are you going to get is me making a comment, or maybe looking at you sideways and being like, oh, what a weird hair color. Because it's viewed as relatively harmless. Okay. Now, at our next level, oh, actually, I'll keep red for later. Let me go with purple. Still not very serious. So, social deviation, right? So you are deviating from a social norm in a slightly more, so it's not mild, it's, let's say, moderate. Moderate deviation. When I can't see what I'm writing, it gets a little mixed up. Still seen as relatively harmless, right? If we're talking about our scale, it's a little bit more harmful than your social diversion, but it's not that bad. And the example that they have here is wearing long hair in some high schools in the 60s. Obviously for men, right? Not for women. Women, it would have been expected. But a man with a ponytail, right? Wearing his hair long when most men wore their hair quite short would have been seen as a form of social deviation. Why? Well, because it was inherently seen as kind of feminine. Haha. Feminine, right? So it was girls wear their hair long, boys wear their hair short. So if you had been a man with a ponytail, you were seen as kind of, a little odd for wearing your hair long, for having this kind of hairstyle, right? You might have been called into the principal's office and been like, I really think maybe they call your parents and they're like, I think Johnny needs a haircut, right? He's wearing his hair in a ponytail, which seems a little weird, right? That's what girls do. So he would have, it would have elicited that kind of reaction. Now again, maybe confusion, probably some apathy, a moderate social response, right? Not serious, right? You're not getting kicked out of school. You're maybe getting teased by your classmates for having long hair, whatever. No big deal. Okay, now on and upward in our hair-based hierarchy of crimes. So the next level is a conflict crime. So what marks a conflict crime out as different from, say, social... Okay, so the other thing here, I should say, here you would have, not a really high level of agreement about how important the norm is, right? That's our other factor. Here it would be like, some people care, some people don't. So you'd have a moderate level of agreement, but not a high level of agreement about how important that particular deviance is. Okay, now a conflict crime. So, this one requires a little bit of historical explanation. Growing a long beard in early 17th century Russia. So, what was kind of happening at this point? Actually, this should be 18th century Russia, but that's okay. In the 1700s, right? So, 1700s in Russia. So Peter the Great had come in, he'd become the Tsar of Russia. And one of the things that Peter the Great wanted to do was to move Russia, drag Russia kicking and screaming into European society. So he banned the nobles, the boyars, from wearing long beards in the traditional Russian style. He basically wanted them to cut their hair and their beards in a European style. So if you ever see illustrations of Peter the Great where he's got this little wispy mustache, that wasn't the traditional way that Russian nobility dressed. Like they had the long, big beard. But Peter the Great changed that. He actually made it a crime, right? If the boyars refused to shave their beards, they could be arrested and imprisoned and their goods, their lands and their goods seized. So, obviously, this was seen as harmful. Harmful, there it is, by Peter the Great and the Russian legal system. And it was a crime that carried a relatively severe punishment. Now that said, there wasn't a universal level of agreement, right? That's why we call it a conflict crime. Because lots of people in Russia at that point were like, well, I mean, we've always worn our beards this way. What's the problem, Mr. Peter the Great? Why are you being so weird about this? And so they objected to this, right? So it's a conflict crime. It was a crime that was seen as harmful because you're disobeying the Tsar, but, not everybody agreed. Okay, and now the last level of our hair-based crimes, we're going to go with red, where we're at consensus crime. So, wearing a samurai hairstyle in medieval Japan. Okay, so here, right, this would have been considered very harmful. The punishment for wearing your hair in the samurai style, if you were not a samurai, was death. Right? Severe punishment, death. And everybody basically agreed that this was bad. Okay, so for context, right? The samurai hairstyle could only be worn by the samurai, and it was a marker of their social class, right? The samurai were a particular social class within Japanese society, and they had certain special rights, like they were allowed to carry swords, right? They were allowed to carry katanas and other kinds of weapons because they were a warrior class. And so, if you went around wearing a samurai hairstyle and you were not a samurai, you were putting the whole class structure of medieval Japanese society in a sort of peril. Because if you're wearing a samurai hairstyle, how will we know if you're a samurai or not? That was the distinguishing feature of the samurai. So everybody was like, yeah, this is very harmful. This puts the class structure of our whole society at risk. And everybody agreed with it, and so the punishment was severe, death. Right. So again, just to review, consensus crime, everybody agrees the punishment is very harmful. The punishment is severe. Consensus crime, there's some debate about the severity of the crime, but it's still seen as harmful, and so there is generally a pretty severe punishment, right? In the case of Russian nobles, imprisonment. At the level of social deviation, right, it's seen as relatively harmless. It's moderately deviant and probably has some slightly more severe consequences. And at the low level of social deviation, it's very mild and seen as just kind of like a little odd. Okay. Just did I forget to put Q&A slides in here? Okay. Would sending your kid to Dagestan for 2 to 3 years and forgetting about him for 6 months and one phone call be an example of breaking a taboo or a law? That is an incredibly specific question. I don't know. I mean, I suppose as long as the child is cared for during that 6-month period, you're probably not breaking a law, right? The law that you have to take care of your child. But yeah, it's probably pretty taboo to abandon your child and totally not interact with them. I hear Dagestan is nice this time of year. I do not, actually. It's probably freaking cold because it's in the Caucasus Mountains. Okay. All right. I did not have enough. Usually the confusing hair pyramid of deviance elicits more questions, which maybe they'll come. How are we doing for time? Oh, we're doing good. Okay, so how do we measure crime, right? So we talk about crime. We obviously have very specific sociological and criminological measures for it. The rates of crime vary over place and time and among different social groups. So it's in the interest especially of the state to kind of track crime, who's committing crimes, and what that looks like. Our main sources of information for it are the criminal justice system, right? Especially things like police arrest reports and court reports. But police reports have 2 main shortcomings. Oops, sorry about that. Okay, much crime is not reported to the police, right? And sometimes, you might not report something to the police because whatever the crime was, it's just not, you see it as not worth it, right? Sometimes people might not even be sure that they've been the victims of a crime. Sometimes this happens a lot with people who are victims of sexual assault, right? They might not be 100% sure what happened, especially if they were drugged or if it was something like an acquaintance that sexually assaulted them. And so a lot of times they won't report things to the police. Sometimes break-ins to cars, people are just like, someone broke into my car and they stole, I don't know, some junk out of my car. I'm not going to bother to call the police because it's just not worth it. So we don't always report crime. And this is particularly true of victimless crimes. So, victimless crimes are generally crimes. Okay, so the most common examples of this are buying and selling drugs. Come on. Drugs and soliciting sex work. Okay. So why would these be in those categories? So let's say that you go off, it's now the Thursday before reading week. You finished all your tests and assignments, and you're like, man, you know what I really need to kind of let off some steam is some Molly, right? I'm sure you're all thinking that, right? The fact that you all knew what that meant is not a good sign. And so you dial up the drug dealer that you have on your phone, and you're like, hey, Joe, could you score me some Molly? And they're like, yes, meet me at the usual place. You meet them at the usual place, probably the McDonald's parking lot near your house. And you do a little handoff, you pay the money, they give you drugs. So technically there are no victims in this crime, right? You've both committed a crime because purchasing and selling drugs, both of those things are a criminal action according to the Criminal Code of Canada. However, neither one of you is a victim in this case because you asked for the drugs, he sold you the drugs, you're both consenting to this interaction, and so there is no victim. So no one is, unless you have a, painful moment of conscience and you report your drug dealer for being a drug dealer, this is not likely going to get reported. And the same thing, obviously, with sex work, right? For whatever reason, someone goes and acquires the services of a prostitute or an escort or whatever, some kind of sex worker, right? At least in theory, the person seeking the services is consenting to receiving them, and the person giving the services is consenting to, having sex with that person. So both people are consenting, so there is no technical victim in this case. It is what's called a victimless crime. Okay, now, and again, those rarely get reported because, it would not be in the interest of either of the people involved in this crime to report that a crime has been committed. So, this is sometimes referred to as, all those crimes that don't get reported are referred to as the dark figure of crime. My pen is annoying me today. Maybe I should just give up. The dark figure of crime, right? Because we don't see them. They're kind of like the iceberg under the waterline. We know there's a lot of crime that we don't know about. We don't know how much of it, but it just never appears. Okay, now, can I write with my finger? No, also no. Generally speaking, who decides what crimes are worth reporting and acting on? So both authorities and the general public, right, will decide what criminal acts to report. So, the example I can give of this, right, even though sometimes authorities will decide that they're not going to really bother enforcing certain crimes. So if we go back to the pre-Justin Trudeau era in Canada, marijuana was not legal, right? It was a controlled substance under the Controlled Substances Act. And what happened, and I can tell you because I remember, is people widely acquired and smoked marijuana, and the police mostly just ignored it, right? And the general public just ignored it. Like, you could walk through a public park and there were people, because you could smell it, people smoking marijuana, because marijuana stinks. And people would just ignore it, like no one was phoning the police and be like, there's some kids in the park smoking marijuana. No one was doing that. And generally the police, even if they were walking through those spaces, was ignoring, people smoking marijuana just because, it was like, yeah, we're not going to bother with this. We consider it such a common and unserious crime that it's not worth the police's time to enforce those particular things. So there are lots of crimes that, police and the public will just not deal with at all. They will not want to talk about them. Okay. All right, I should, hang on, I'll do it on this slide. So there are basically three kinds of crime measurement that we rely on, sociologically. So there are what are called uniform crime reports or uniform crime statistics. So uniform crime reports or statistics are basically your police and court data, right? These are the official kind of statistics that are given to the public by the police. So if you want to find out what these are, you could go and Google Canadian Centre for Justice Statistics, or the CCJS, which is Stat Canada's arm that keeps all of these statistics, right? So if you ever, see a news article or an academic article that talks about, crime rates, and this is what the crime rate is, you're generally getting this, uniform crime reporting coming out of official statistical bodies. Okay, so that's uniform crime statistics. But we know that that's not all the crime that happens, right? There's this dark figure of crime. So other ways that we get to this is two other kinds of surveys that researchers will do called self-report surveys and victim surveys. So self-report surveys, usually these are sections of larger kind of social research surveys that ask people questions about whether they have committed crimes, right? So these are done obviously anonymously, but people are asked, whether they have been involved in any criminal activities, either as the perpetrator or the victim, right? So people self-report. And sometimes these are used to compare with those uniform crime statistics, right? It'll say like, okay, uniform crime statistics will say that 15% of youth will report having been victim of a crime, but then the self-report survey says, oh, actually, 35% of young people report being victims of crimes in some way. So, or perpetrators, right? They also will ask about perpetrators. And again, these are always done anonymously, and it's usually as part of larger social science research, right? You give people a bigger survey that has some questions on whether they've committed crimes. The other category is victimization surveys, and again, as part of usually other bigger surveys that are given out, they'll ask people if they've been a victim of a crime, right? And again, both of these are essentially aimed at capturing the stuff that doesn't show up in uniform crime statistics, right? Like, have you ever bought or purchased drugs? Have you ever solicited sexual services from a sex worker? My battery is running low. I can fix this. So these are, I hope I brought my charger. Huzzah, the day is saved. Or huzzah, now you have to stay later. Whichever you prefer. And you're like, oh no, his battery's dying. Do we get to leave early? No such luck, friends. I brought my charger today. Okay. I love my Surface Laptop 5, but I gotta say the battery life on it is not the best. Okay, so I think that covers that. Okay. This gets us to some fun things. So if we look at crime reports going back, from 1962 to the middle of the 2010s or the beginning of the 2010s, one of the things that we consistently see, right, and we actually see this is Canada, I believe. I'm pretty sure this is Canada. But if we look, oh yeah, StatsCan, over here. There we go. We would see the same thing if we look at the United States, right? US looks very similar. So we saw from the 1960s crime going up, all kinds, right? So total crime went up, peaked around here. Property crime went up, and then both violent crime and other crimes and violent crime both went up and kind of peak all around the same time, after which all of them have been kind of in decline for a really long time. And that basically continued until about 2020, when you had a spike in crime around the time COVID hit as well. And we haven't seen that come down quite from that peak or from that spike in 2020, though it never got back up to here. Okay. Police reported crime severity. So this is a really interesting, got coughing and sneezing everywhere today. Oh dear. Please, I don't want to get sick during reading week. I only have the 1 week to catch up on everything I haven't done yet. Okay, so in 1998, Stats Canada started keeping a particular statistic that they call crime severity, right? So basically, not only keeping, kind of raw crime stats like this, like how many crimes are being committed, but how severe those crimes are. So, the amount of property damage being committed, the amount of money being stolen, the harm done by violent crime. And basically from 1998 to, 2015 about, what we've seen is general declines in crime severity as well as overall declines in crime, right? Kind of hit the bottom around 2014 and then it peaked up a bit and it's kind of been doing bumpy stuff since then. Okay. So, this is a fun slide. Do I have time to do this slide? Probably. I got 9 minutes. We'll try. So, why? Why do we have declining crime rates, and why particularly starting in, right at the end of the 1980s, right? Beginning of the 1990s. And we see this both in Canada and in the US. So why did crime kind of go up and up and up into the end of the 1980s and then decline from there? Okay, so possible explanations for this. One, in response to spiking crime rates coming out of the 1960s and lasting through the end of the 1980s, the response of the state was to bulk up the criminal justice system, right? So they hired more police officers, gave those police officers more training, and expanded, prisons and hired more correctional officers, right? So one of the things that will happen, so crime starts to spike, you start to hire more police officers to deal with the spike in crime. The more law enforcement officers you have, the more likely someone committing a crime is likely to get caught, right? So if you have, simple math, if you have one cop in a town, that one cop can only catch so many criminals. If you have 20, they're going to catch a lot more people doing wrong things, right? So substantially bigger and also better trained, right? Better investigative techniques, better ways of solving crimes and catching people, potentially led to a big increase in the number of crimes being reported, caught and reported. Okay, number 2. So basically what would happen is you get a kind of spike up to here, right? And then law enforcement catches up, and then basically crime declines because people are like, oh, I'm not going to commit crimes because I will get caught because there's so many police out there. This is interesting. I'll tell you one little thing on this. This is largely seems to be the story in New York City, right? So New York City had a huge crime problem really in the 1970s and 80s. And one of the responses to this was to hire a lot more police officers. The other one was using statistics to predict crime. So the New York police system started to use a system called CompStat, or computational statistics, to figure out where to deploy their police officers, and another approach called stop and frisk, which is a little bit infamous now. So what happened in New York City, right? There were a huge spike in crime, and then they increased the NYPD. For a while, that increase seems to have actually caused crime to kind of jump up, right? Because there's more criminals being caught. But then once people are aware of how many police officers are out there, they sort of stop committing crimes, right? They start hiding it better. They stop committing crimes because they're worried about getting caught. And it's sort of like, people will commit crimes, in situations where they think they won't get caught. Okay, I will call her back in 4 minutes. That's my daughter. She's probably nervous. She got to the finals of the improv competition she entered with her classmates, and now she's like, where are you? Are you coming to pick me up? Okay, it's all good. So, New York City, right? Increasing kind of the number of police officers and then how well they were trained and the way they were doing things, for a while led to an increase in reported crime rates until people were like, I'm not committing crimes because I don't want to go to jail. Okay, how are we doing here? 5 minutes. I can do one more point maybe, and we'll stop from there and we'll pick up the other two, because this one's my favorite one to talk about because it's a weird argument, but we'll talk about it next time. So, young men, right? Young men are prone to crime. And the kind of key demographic for committing crimes is men about 15 to about 22, 23. A huge number of the crimes committed are committed by this particular demographic, right? Why? Well, men are a little bit reckless. Men are quite risk tolerant by nature for the most part, especially at the kind of one end of the bell curve. And so young men commit a lot of crimes. So, when we're here, right? Okay, I'm going to erase all my doodles on my slide here. This is the last year of the baby boom, right? So, if we track about 20 years, so, you know, the baby boom starts in 1946, and ends in about 1962. So by about 1982, your youngest part of that demographic is entering their 20s. So what you see through this whole period is you have a lot of young men. Did my mic just turn off? Okay. You have a lot of young men, right? A lot of young men. When you reach here, right, the youngest of them is going to be turning, kind of edging towards their late 20s, early 30s. And then you have a declining number of young men. So as the number of young men declines, so does the crime rate, right? There's never going to be 0 young men, so your crime rate's never going to be 0. But the theory is that this big spike was caused essentially by the baby boomers, right? Lots of young men born in the baby boom that commit crimes, and then as they get older and they age out of crime, and I mean, it's not like crime stops at 22, 23, just you have most of it committed here, and obviously there's a long tail, but by the age of 40, most men who were committing crimes will have stopped. Okay, I think I'm out of time, mostly. So, let's leave it there. I have 2 minutes left, but I don't think I can do another point in 2 minutes. Let's leave it there. We'll pick up on slide 14 after the reading break. And now my pen's working fine. All right. Have a great reading break.